الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear people, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another episode of An Ayah a Day Shows You the Way. Bismillahi ta'ala, today we'll be exploring the 21st juz of the Quran, more specifically Surah Luqman, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا بني إنها إن تك مثقال حبة من خردل فتكن في صخرة أو في السماوات أو في الأرض يأت بها الله إن الله لطيف خبير يا بني أقم الصلاة وأمر بالمعروف وانه عن المنكر واصبر على ما أصابك إن ذلك من عزم الأمور. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Luqman, translation, O my dear son, even if there were to be a deed the size of a mustard seed, or the weight of a mustard seed, in a huge boulder, a huge rock, within the heavens or the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come forth with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is indeed most subtle and most knowing. O my dear son, establish salah, call for what is good, and speak out against what is bad, and patiently endure what befalls you. Indeed, that is the best resolution or best resolve. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, He's bringing forth, it's worth mentioning, advice from a very, very, very wise man, Luqman radiallahu anh. Now, it's said that Luqman radiallahu anh was neither a prophet nor a king. He was just a man who was endowed with a huge amount of wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his advice to his son was so powerful that Allah Azza wa Jal included this advice in the Quran. Now imagine, fathers, how many pages of speech you speak to your children. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And Luqman radiallahu anh similarly perhaps did the same. But there were these points that Allah Azza wa Jal included in this surah to be part of this timeless guidance for mankind, i.e. the Quran. So we'll begin inshallah. The first point is literally in the first word, subhanallah, Ya bunay. Now, in the Arabic language, if you want to say, oh my son, you could say, Ya ibni, Ya ibni. Or you could say, my boy, Ya waladi. Here the word being used here is called Ya bunay. And in the Arabic language, it's known as Sighatu tasghir, where you choose the smaller version of that word. And there's many purposes of why it's done, but one of the purposes is to imply an intense sense of love, an intense sense of nearness and belonging. So for example, like the word in Arabic language, hurra, is cat. Hurayra is the smaller version of cat, i.e. kitten. Similarly, the word ibn or ibni in Arabic is like my son, but when you say bunay, it's a smaller, perhaps almost cuter version of that, which is why it denotes a lot of nearness. The first lesson you learn, subhanallah, and this is a lesson we can learn as fathers, is that Luqman alayhi salam, he began his advice with his son with love. He began his advice with love. He's showing through this example to the rest of the fathers, and Allah Azza wa Jalla is including this in the Quran, so as to show the fathers that when you have your relationship with your son specifically, because daughters, mashallah, they bring out softness inside men. But even with the sons, even with the boys, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here, establish your relationship with your sons based on love. based on love. Because, with mothers, if a mother was to call the child, like in Pakistani culture, she would say, "Oh, beta, come and sit with me." And naturally, the son will come and gravitate. Why? Because mum is the soft spot. But when the dad was to come, like just generally speaking, the dad's he's quite a scary figure. But Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying here in the Quran, how did Luqman alayhi salam address his son? He used what's known as sighatul tasghir, which is the smaller version of son. Why? Because it denotes nearness, it denotes love, it denotes affection. Ya bunay, Ya bunay, oh my dear beloved son. And that's the true translation of this. So number one, the lesson that you learn is establish your relationship with your sons on love. Don't be stingy in showing them love. Don't be stingy in acknowledging their efforts. Don't be stingy in even calling them. This is something beautiful, like my father does personally, and he still does it to this day. Here and there he will say this, and subhanAllah, the effect it has on me instantaneously is when he picks up the phone, he'll say, "Son, how you doing?" Automatically when he says that, I feel very close to him. Because if for example, like the times where dad just calls and says, "Osama," the entire dunya calls me Osama. The entire dunya calls me Osama. But who's the only one that can call me son? It can only be dad. So when my dad calls me son, automatically it's just put my heart in a zone of love and awe and respect for my father, because he's made that connection and communication built on warmth. He's shown me that I am from him, my son. So this is the first lesson you learn. Then, subhanAllah, this is the first piece of advice he gives him, that, if there was a deed, a weight of a mustard seed in a rock, and this rock was in the heavens or the earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring it forward. Now, subhanAllah, think about just the wording being used. The word for rock here is sakhra. Sakhra is actually a boulder. It's not like a tiny rock you find on a seaside or a beach. The word sakhra is a massive boulder. Like, it's even bigger than the ones those competitions, World's Strongest Men hold. It's a huge boulder. Something perhaps you can't lift by yourself. Huge boulder. Allah Azza wa Jalla is saying, Luqman alayhi salam, is saying in this to his son, that if there is a deed and the weight of it is a mustard seed in this huge boulder, and this huge boulder can be wherever in the dunya, the heavens or the earth. Now just think about it, you got a huge boulder, and then that huge boulder is in another gigantic, enormous boulder, which is known as planet Earth. Says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come forward with it. He can bring it forward. A mustard seed, tiny, tiny mustard seed, small, within a huge boulder. So even if you were to break this boulder with a hammer, how many tiny, tiny segments would you need to break the boulder into to find the mustard seed? But Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to another degree. He's saying that if this huge boulder is in the heavens or the earth, He can bring it forward. And then he ends up saying in the end, Inna Allaha latifun khabir, Allah is most subtle and most knowing. So what's the point, and what is Luqman radiallahu anh trying to illustrate to his son here? He's establishing the number one idea which will serve as a means of salvation, protection, and guardianship for his son, even if he was to pass away, which is what? There's a creator. There's a khaliq. There's a maker. And this maker, whether or not I'm here, whether or not I stay with you for long, even if there's a mustard seed of a deed that you do, He will bring it forward. I.e., He's establishing clearly in the mind of his son that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, that there is a maker. And that maker will hold you to account. That's the first thing, subhanAllah, Luqman radiallahu anh is establishing with his child. And that's what all of us should be establishing within our sons, our children in the community, that you shouldn't be scared of parents, meaning you shouldn't have this sense of, if I get caught, that's when I'll get in trouble. He's doing the opposite, that even if I'm not there, Allah Azza wa Jal is forever watching. And then, you know the words used to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's characteristics? Latifun khabir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is subtle and most knowing. Why was this wording used? It's so beautiful. You know, if somebody knows you've done something wrong, they're not subtle about it. They will tell you either through a gesture, body language, silence, or direct speech or direct approach, and they'll tell you you've done something wrong. You can tell when someone knows you've done something wrong. You could tell that immediately. He's saying here though that even if you do not feel, subhanallah, even if you do not feel that Allah Azza wa Jal knows, because He hasn't brought it in front of you, that hence the word latif is used, just know He's all-knowing. So if your life is hunky-dory and you've done a lot of bad things, don't think for a moment that Allah Azza wa Jal has missed something that you've done which has displeased Him. So these are the first two lessons we're learning in this ayah, that fathers should establish their communication and relationship with their sons specifically on love, a lot of love. And I'd say, subhanallah, this point has to be focused on more now than ever before, because the scales of the world we live in today is totally imbalanced. You know, why is it that children, subhanallah, they don't feel like they can speak to parents easily? Now, of course, you do get cases where parents, they do a lot for their children and they're soft, and it's just a case where it's just their test. It's the qada from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But to be honest, and to be frankly honest, sometimes the parents don't do themselves favors because of how they act with their children. So how are we going to expect the children to come out with what's going on in their mind, the desires that are whispering to them, the problems that they're facing, some trouble that they could be involved in? If you establish it on love, that's the perhaps guarantor that your child has no barriers, i.e. no gates with you. All of them are dropped because he knows deep down that my father loves me deeply. So that's the lesson you learn. And the point number 2 is establishing the idea that a creator is always watching, and your deeds, you'll be held account to them. The other word, subhanAllah, I forgot to mention this, when Allah says ya'ti bihallah, comes from the word ata ya'ti, which means to come, but it means to come with ease, because you also have a verb which is ja'a, and you have this in Surah Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. But the word ja'a, if you look in the Quran, is used with mighty, heavy, gigantic tasks, like إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. The Nasr of Allah is something heavy, is gigantic, it's a huge thing. So the verb ja'a was used with that, because it's a mighty task. Allah's, ja'a. And in Surah Fajr, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا. And your Lord will come on that day with the angels row by row. Like it's not something easy. But Allah uses the verb ata here, which means He can bring forward that deed of a weight of a mustard seed with ease. No problem. Easy. No effort required whatsoever. And that's the wording used in this ayah to make the son of Luqman radiallahu anh understand Allah Azza wa Jal is all seeing, all hearing, most knowing, and most subtle. Then the next advice. Ya bunay, again, it's used in the form of denoting a nearness and form of strong love. Aqim as-salah. Aqim as-salah. This point is very important, subhanAllah. There's a difference if you were to say to someone in the Arabic language, Salli. Salli is the command form. It's a command, it's an instruction, an order to tell someone to pray salah. So if you're saying to, for example, Muhammad, say, Salli ya Muhammad, O Muhammad, pray. Salli ya Ilyas, Ilyas, pray. But then when you use the command form, Aqim as-salah, which comes from the word iqama, the word iqama means to establish and erect something and to build a strong foundation around that thing. It means to completely build something based upon a strong foundation. That's what aqim as-salah means, and it comes from the word iqama. Like, for example, when we say iqamatud din, establishing the deen, it's on something strong and firm. It's much bigger than a small, tiny action in and of itself. It's a whole host of things. Luqman radiallahu anh is telling his son, Aqim salah, establish salah. Establish salah, meaning that you're going to go through life, your days, your nights, different activities, work, studies, marriage, children, going abroad, holidays. You're going to go through a whirlpool of actions and activities in your life. But when you make something established, when you establish something, everything else rotates around it. Everything else rotates around it. Now, why is the idea of salah so important? And sadly, this is hurtful to say, but the whole kind of action of salah has been degraded literally to just those actions you do, which is the takbir, the ruku', the sujood, the tashahhud, the taslim, all of that. It's just a motion of action, sadly. But if you were to understand truly the essence of salah, and you were to give it its due diligence, it would ensure that you stand upright the moment you finish your salah. Why is this? Let me explain. The moment you begin your salah and you say Allahu Akbar, and you put your hands over each other, the statement Allahu Akbar, Allah is the most greatest, you're recognizing Allah Azza wa Jal to be the most supreme power that exists. From the first utterance of the salah, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, you, the musalli, the one who's praying, he recognizes Allah is the ultimate power. There's nothing greater than Him. Then you now go into Fatiha. All praise be to the Lord of the worlds. Again, you're revering Allah in such a magnificent, giant way. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most kind. And then, even now you skip, for example, Fatiha. It's got so many powerful meanings. You go into ruku'. You're bowing down, i.e., you yourself, from an action standpoint, you are bowing down to a higher being. So you've submitted yourself to this being. And in that, when you're doing that action, you say, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. Glory be to my Lord, the Great. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Allah is the one who praises Him. And I'll make my point after I've explained this. Then you go into sujood. You go into sujood and you say, you know, when they say that the hadith of Prophet says that, you know, the servant is most closest to Allah Azza wa Jal wa huwa sajid, when he is prostrating. What do you say in sujood? Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. Glory be to my Lord the highest. And then in tashahhud, you raise your finger, you testify with your finger in salah that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is His slave, His servant, and His messenger. What do all of these actions denote? All of these actions, subhanAllah, they denote that you are giving the rights to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through all of these actions in a very meaningful way. So what do I mean when we contrast that? That the next part of the ayah where it says, enjoin the good, forbid the evil, meaning that when somebody stands for salah and establishes salah, by subhanAllah, natural extension, he has to stand up for what's good and bad outside. Why does he have to stand up for what's good and bad outside? Because when he said, like he begins the salah, Allahu Akbar, Allah is the most greatest, and in society, he sees ways of life which are given more dominance than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way of life, how can that sit easy with him when he's praying? Because the moment he prays, he says, Allahu Akbar. Of course, Allah Azza wa Jalla is the greatest, but society is showing something else. When he's bowing down to Allah Azza wa Jalla in ruku' and he's saying, glory be to my Lord, the greatest, is that what the world is bowing down to? The true creator, the true master? Or is the world bowing down to man-made ways of life and their whims and their desires and these isms, materialism, consumerism? And then when he says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Allah is the one who praises him, when he leaves that salah, he knows that that praise isn't just limited to the salah. Because when the man, the Muslim, leaves salah and he calls for what's good and bad, it's a form of praising Allah Azza wa Jal. So he's taken everything from iqamat salah, establishing salah, and he's made it real. He's made it real. Because how can you have a man who stands for salah, but he doesn't stand for what's good and bad? And that's what Luqman radiallahu anh says to his son, that you stand for salah, you establish salah, and a natural byproduct of you establishing salah will make you an upright person outside. And that's how truly that's what salah should do to someone. If somebody is praying salah and they're detached from dealing with the world's affairs, the salah has not had the effect it's meant to have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obliged upon insan. Because that salah, even the wording, the word salah and the word sila means connection, relationship. It has a linguistic connection with the word salah. So you're connected to Allah Azza wa Jal so intimately in that. Therefore, when you're connected to Allah Azza wa Jal so intimately through that action, when you leave the salah now, it should give you so much energy to carry on those things that you praise Allah in the salah, but you implement it out in society. So when you establish salah, what should you do? What's the natural byproduct of salah? What should it energize you to do? Call for good and speak out against what is evil. And then Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا أَصَابَكَ. Have patience or patiently endure what befalls you. Why? And it's like a cycle. Salah, calling for what's good, enjoining what is bad, calling for what is good and forbidding what is bad, and patiently enduring what befalls you. It's a cycle. It goes round and round and round. Why? Because the one who speaks out against what is evil and calls towards what is good, he will be inflicted with trials and tribulations. That's what Luqman radiallahu anh is telling his son clearly. That when you establish salah, it forces you to be a carrier of everything you do in that salah outside. So the meanings of Allah being most greatest, you carry that outside. And when you want to carry that outside, people are not going to like it. And sadly, even people from our own, subhanAllah, Muslim communities won't like it. But it's a cycle. It's a cycle. And that's what Luqman radiallahu anh is showing his son here, that in order for you to be the best dawah carrier, you have the establishment of salah in its true sense, like I've briefly explained. And then when people come and they upset you, when they upset you and you're downtrodden, what's the next step? Salah. So it's a cycle again. So I pray, I did justice to these two ayat, even though there's so much more to go through. All good was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all bad and shortcomings were from myself. Please overlook them. And bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of an ayah a day shows you the way. Until then, barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.